The cardboard box was still flat under the conference table when Mara Voss told the single father sitting across from her that he would never walk away from his job. She said it in front of 4 senior executives, with the calm certainty of someone who had spent years watching people choose money over pride. But instead of arguing, Rafe Calder looked at her for a long second, reached under the table, pulled out that unused box, and began folding the bottom flaps together. That was the moment Mara stopped speaking. Welcome to Digital Story Corner. In today's video, we're telling the story of a billionaire who thought she understood exactly how far she could push a man who needed his paycheck, and the quiet, folded cardboard box that proved her completely wrong. 3 hours earlier, Rafe had been sitting in his pickup truck in a parking garage beneath downtown Seattle, eating a peanut butter sandwich over the steering wheel, so he wouldn't drop crumbs on his work shirt. It was raining, which surprised nobody in Seattle, though this particular rain had been falling since before sunrise, turning the concrete ramp slick and black. Rafe parked on level P4 because employees at Voss Meridian Group weren't allowed to use the spaces closer to the elevators. Those were reserved for clients, executives, and people whose names appeared on glass office doors. Rafe's name appeared nowhere. He was 38, broad-shouldered, usually tired, and worked as a facilities operations supervisor in a 42-story office tower. His job title sounded better than the reality. Most days he dealt with broken access cards, leaking pipes, jammed loading docks, angry department heads, and employees who somehow believed a thermostat could be adjusted separately for every single desk. He had been there 6 years. He was also raising his 9-year-old daughter, Tessa, alone. Every weekday morning began at 5:40. Rafe made coffee, burned toast more often than he admitted, checked Tessa's backpack for signed school papers, and reminded her to brush the back teeth, since she had developed a suspicious habit of only brushing the ones visible when she smiled. By 7:45, he was usually inside the tower checking overnight maintenance reports. His life wasn't tragic. He hated when people treated it that way. It was simply tight. Tight on time, tight on money, tight on sleep. Tessa's mother, Karen, had died 4 years earlier after a short illness that left behind hospital bills. A closet full of clothes Rafe took almost a year to sort through, and a little girl who still sometimes asked questions at bedtime because nighttime made old memories louder. Rafe earned enough to keep them steady if nothing unusual happened. Unfortunately, unusual things had been happening for months. The transmission in his pickup was slipping. Tessa needed orthodontic work insurance barely touched. Their landlord had raised the rent by $210. The previous Tuesday, Rafe had stood in a grocery aisle comparing 2 jars of pasta sauce because one was 60 cents cheaper. He chose the cheaper one, then put the Parmesan back on the shelf. That was the kind of math his life had become, which was exactly why Mara Voss believed she understood him. At 43, Mara was the founder and majority owner of Voss Meridian Group, a logistics and commercial property company valued in the billions. She wasn't flashy. She drove a plain dark sedan and disliked long lunches. Her reputation came from something else entirely. Mara noticed weakness. She could sit through a 2-hour meeting, say very little, and remember exactly who had avoided a difficult question. She had built her company from a small freight routing business started in a rented office near Tacoma, understanding debt, exhaustion, and risk because she had lived through all 3 herself. But success had changed one thing in her. She had stopped believing people when they said money wasn't the most important thing. That morning, Mara arrived at headquarters irritated before she even removed her coat. A major insurance audit had uncovered repeated safety documentation failures across 3 buildings. The reports weren't catastrophic, but serious enough to delay a refinancing package worth millions. 2 senior managers immediately blamed the facilities team. Rafe's name appeared in the email chain. At 9:20, he was called upstairs. The executive floor always made him uncomfortable. The carpet was too quiet. The coffee was free but served in cups so small he needed 3 of them. Mara sat at the head of the conference table with 4 executives, including Preston Vale, the regional operations director, a polished man who had once sent Rafe a 6-paragraph email because a lobby plant had been moved without approval. Preston presented the problem neatly. Missing inspection signatures, delayed repair logs, incomplete vendor records. He suggested Rafe's team had simply failed to follow procedure. Rafe listened without interrupting. He had learned that interrupting people with higher salaries rarely made them hear better. When Preston finished, Rafe placed a worn blue folder on the table, containing copies of emails, work orders, and requests sent over the previous 5 months. He had repeatedly warned management the building was understaffed. 2 maintenance positions had stayed vacant because Preston had frozen hiring to meet quarterly cost targets. A fire door contractor had been replaced with a cheaper vendor despite Rafe's objections. Weekend inspections had been assigned to a single technician covering 3 separate properties. The failures were real. So were the reasons behind them. Mara read several pages, her expression barely changing. Preston insisted the folder didn't excuse incomplete records. Rafe agreed, which seemed to irritate everyone more than an argument would have. He explained his team had made mistakes because they were rushing, including himself. 2 weeks earlier, he had signed off on a generator inspection nearly 24 hours late because he had spent that evening at urgent care with Tessa after she fell during soccer practice. He didn't mention that part in the meeting. He simply said the late signature was his responsibility. Mara finally asked why he hadn't escalated the staffing problem directly to her office. Rafe explained that people at his level didn't simply email Billionaire owners when a regional director ignored them. There was a chain of command, and breaking it could get a person labeled difficult, disloyal, or not a team player. Preston called that explanation cynical. Rafe said nothing. Mara closed the folder. She should have ended the meeting there and investigated properly. Instead, she made a mistake that would bother her for years. She took Rafe's calmness personally. Perhaps it was the bad morning. Perhaps the refinancing pressure. Perhaps it was simply that he had exposed a management failure without ever raising his voice. And for one ugly moment she felt he was challenging her authority in her own conference room. She told him every employee believed his problems were unique. Rafe's jaw tightened. She continued, saying the company paid him well, provided health insurance, and had kept him employed through a difficult market. If conditions were truly as unreasonable as he claimed, he was free to leave. Then Mara said the sentence. She told him he wouldn't quit. Not with a child depending on him. Not with bills. You need this job too much. The silence afterward was different. Rafe didn't look angry. That would have been easier. He looked disappointed. Then he noticed several flattened cardboard archive boxes stacked beneath a side table, left behind after legal records had been moved the previous week. He stood, took one, and began folding it. "What are you doing?" Mara asked. "Packing." That was all. He left the conference room and took the elevator down to the 26th floor. For the first minute after he was gone, nobody spoke. Preston eventually said Rafe was being emotional. Mara turned toward him, something about the word bothering her deeply. She opened the blue folder again, this time reading it slowly. Downstairs, Rafe placed the box on his desk. His belongings looked embarrassingly small once he started gathering them. A stainless steel coffee mug, 2 screwdrivers brought from home, a framed photograph of Tessa missing her front tooth, a tiny ceramic frog she had made in 2nd grade. His assistant, Norin, stood beside his desk and asked if this was some kind of joke. Rafe shook his head. He felt sick, which was the truth nobody in that conference room could see. He wasn't making a brave, cinematic decision. He was calculating rent in his head, wondering whether his old pickup would survive long enough for temporary work outside the city. His hands were actually trembling when he unplugged his desk lamp. But underneath the fear was something harder. For months, he had watched his technicians skip lunches. He had watched a 61-year-old electrician named Gus work a double shift because nobody else was available. He had missed Tessa's entire Saturday soccer game once because a loading dock sensor failed. He had accepted all of it because he needed the paycheck. Then Mara had looked directly at that need and used it as a leash. Rafe could survive being tired. He could not teach his daughter that fear was the same thing as loyalty. Upstairs, Mara kept reading. The emails were worse than she first realized. Rafe had warned Preston repeatedly. One message mentioned a technician working 13 consecutive days. Another requested emergency authorization to replace a failing pressure valve, a request Preston had denied before approving decorative lobby renovations that same week. Mara asked her finance chief to pull staffing records. Preston had received a substantial performance bonus for reducing operating costs. Mara had designed that bonus structure herself, rewarding managers for lowering costs, then acting surprised when they squeezed the people beneath them. Mara left the conference room. By the time she reached the 26th floor, half the facilities department already knew what had happened. Rafe was placing the ceramic frog into his box. Mara stopped several feet from his desk, and people pretended not to watch. She could have pulled him into a private office to protect herself from embarrassment. Instead, she stood where everyone could see her and told him she had read the full file. He kept packing. She said she had been wrong. His hands stopped for a moment, then continued. Mara wasn't used to apologies that failed to produce immediate relief. In her world, people usually accepted whatever version of regret powerful people offered them. Rafe didn't. He told her quietly the problem was bigger than one meeting. She knew. She asked him not to resign yet. He looked at the photograph of Tessa in the box, then back at Mara, and for one uncomfortable second she saw exactly what she had done. She had assumed his responsibilities made him weak. In reality, those responsibilities were the exact reason he had tolerated so much for so long. Rafe didn't unpack. He handed in his badge that afternoon and drove away with the box strapped into the passenger seat. Halfway home, he pulled into a gas station and sat there for 12 minutes before calling his older sister to admit what he had done. She asked if he had enough money for next month. He said probably. It wasn't a convincing answer. That evening, Tessa found the box beside the kitchen table. Rafe explained without making Mara sound cruel or himself sound heroic, saying only that work had become unhealthy and that sometimes adults wait too long to admit something is wrong. Tessa listened while eating cereal for dinner, then asked the question he feared. Are we going to lose the apartment? Rafe told her he would do everything he could to prevent that. He didn't promise more. The following weeks were difficult. He applied to 14 jobs. 3 companies never replied. He picked up temporary maintenance work at a community theater and repaired a bakery's walk-in refrigerator for cash. He also started sleeping a little better. Meanwhile, Mara made changes that cost her company real money. Preston was dismissed after an internal review confirmed he had concealed staffing risks and altered reporting summaries. But Mara didn't pretend firing one man solved everything. She removed the cost-cutting bonus formula, authorized the vacant maintenance positions, and began meeting with frontline teams without their directors present, listening to uncomfortable truths she didn't enjoy hearing. 6 weeks after Rafe quit, Mara called him. He almost ignored the number. She didn't offer his old job back. Instead, she told him the company was creating an independent building safety and workforce operations unit, reporting outside regional management, with authority to stop work when conditions became unsafe. She wanted him to help design it. Rafe asked about the salary. It was higher than before, but not absurdly so. Then he asked the question she hadn't expected. Would his technicians be allowed to report problems without retaliation? Mara said yes. Rafe told her he wanted it in writing. For the first time on that call, Mara laughed, not because it was funny, but because she respected the answer. He returned 2 weeks later. There was no grand welcome. Norin hugged him near the elevators and immediately complained nobody had fixed the terrible coffee machine since he left. Rafe placed the ceramic frog on his new desk. The cardboard box stayed in the trunk of his pickup for months. Life didn't become perfect. Tessa still needed braces. The truck transmission finally failed in November. Rafe and Mara still disagreed sometimes, sharply. But the company became a little better, Not because a billionaire saved a single father, and not because a single father taught a billionaire some magical lesson in one afternoon. It became better because one person finally refused to keep pretending, and another person, after causing harm, chose not to defend her pride instead of fixing it. A year later, Mara visited the 26th floor and noticed the old photograph of Tessa beside Rafe's computer, the crooked ceramic frog sitting next to it. She asked if he still had the box. Rafe said yes, it was in his garage now, filled with old extension cords and Christmas lights. Mara smiled, then admitted something she had never told him. The moment he started folding that box, she had been certain he was bluffing. Rafe looked at her and said, "So was I." That answer stayed with her because courage is often described as certainty, when in ordinary life it usually looks like nothing of the sort. Sometimes courage is a frightened father driving home with no job, wondering how he'll pay rent. Sometimes accountability is a powerful woman reading the same folder twice and finally seeing what she missed the first time. Real change rarely arrives with perfect words or dramatic music. It begins in smaller ways, with listening before judging, admitting when power has made you careless, and refusing to use someone's fear against them. Kindness isn't keeping people dependent on you and calling it generosity. It's giving them enough dignity to stand, enough honesty to choose, and enough room to walk away if they must. If this story moved you, subscribe to Digital Story Corner and hit the bell. A brand new story drops every single day.